Hi everybody, it's Mr. Buro from Staten Tech. Today in AutoCAD we're going to be doing rectangles, polygons, and I'm going to show you how the grid works. So in AutoCAD, if you wanted to, you could easily put together a rectangle just by using lines, but that really is not the point. So if you see, if I just kind of put four lines together, it very easily becomes a rectangle, but they remain as separate line pieces, and that's not what you want. Having the ability to create a polygon in AutoCAD is going to help you transition to do 3D work, as well as a number of other things. So let's start. I'm just gonna go over here. You'll see by default the rectangle option is at the top right hand corner of the draw panel in the ribbon. So if you just click rectangle, right away it gives you a prompt for the first corner of the rectangle. So if I wanted to click like over here somewhere, you could see that attached to my cursor now the rectangle is being created. And if you wanted to, you could just click and drop, and that's it. And that rectangle is a single piece, as I said before. Or when you click where you want the rectangle to be, or you type where you want the rectangle to be, you could simply type a length and a width using relative coordinates. So if I want my rectangle to be 20 units wide and 10 units high, I would just type 20, 10, because that will take my next point 20 units to the right and 10 units up. And then I get this rectangle, which of course is definitely 20 units wide and 10 units high. So that's a very convenient way of doing something. There are a lot of options when you draw a rectangle. There's something called chamfer and fillet, as well as a few others. Chamfer puts kind of like a cut or wedged edge on each of the corners of the rectangle, and fillet puts a rounded corner on each of the corners of the rectangle. I'll show you chamfer first. I'll do a chamfer distance of 1, which means like the distance from the corners of the wedge, and then just kind of draw one of those rectangles, and that's how you get a chamfered rectangle. And again, the distance from the corner to where those points are is 1 inch. Now a filleted rectangle, if I pick fillet, it'll erase the chamfer. And I'll also use 1 as my distance here. This will be the radius of the fillet. You can see a similar rectangle. That's called a rounded rectangle usually inside CAD. And if I wanted to go back and draw a regular rectangle, I'm going to have to go into the fillet command and set the radius to 0. And now I can draw a regular rectangle again. Taking those away, I'll show you a few other things. There's width and thickness. Thickness and elevation I'd rather you not worry about right now. Elevations are bringing it into the z-axis, and thickness kind of like changes also it into a 3D object. Width is simply the width of the line, and this is also something you really shouldn't be messing with in AutoCAD. The reason for that is because even though you change the width of the line that's being drawn here, the thing that you need to take notice of is that this is still a singular line inside CAD. So if I click on it, you can still see the grips. They're kind of like buried inside the line, and that's not really good practice. That was a thickness of 0.5. If I really wanted to do a thickness of 0.5 on a rectangle, I probably should have the rectangle parts be the outer and the inner edge. And that would be like more practical. I'm going to set the width back to 0. And then I could just draw a rectangle, and then if I wanted to, I can offset that rectangle by 0.5. We'll talk about offset more in detail in the future, but for now, that created a rectangle whose width is 0.5, and yes, I can fill that in with color using something called hatch. Again, that will be something we'll talk about in the future. So those are the normal rectangle commands. After you drop the first point of a rectangle, there are other options as well that just help you in measurement and creation. So if I wanted to draw a rectangle based on its area, I would click the area command over here after dropping down the first coordinate, of course, and then hit area, and then I could use a locked area. So if I type in 220, then that'll be a 220 unit surface area rectangle. So if I type that, then I click the first dimension that I want to type, and the other one's going to be automatic. So if I do width and then type 22, that means the length would be 10 in this case. So so that we have a width over here of 22 and I guess a length of 10 over here. Okay, so those are rectangles inside AutoCAD, and again, they behave as a singular object, which is good. You can always also explode a rectangle into the lines that make it up. Underneath the rectangle command inside the menu is the polygon command. So if you activate the polygon command, there's quite a few things for you to consider. The first thing you should consider, of course, is how many sides you want it to be. By default, it's usually 4, but I'm going to use 6. So I'll type that and press enter. And then it asks me to specify a center point. So this time I'll be a little bit more exact. I'll type in 15, 15. So I have my center point there, and then it wants me to choose an inscribed polygon or a circumscribed polygon with respect to a circle. If I choose inscribed, you'll kind of see that there really doesn't seem to be a visual indicator of that on the screen. My ortho is still on. If I turn the ortho off, you can see that also the point of the hexagon travels with my mouse, with one of the vertices. So I can do that if I want. If I did want the hexagon to appear flat or pointy on the bottom or the right side, I'll just hit F8 and turn ortho on, and it'll have it locked into a flat bottom or a pointy bottom. Okay, so you can play with that if you want with F8 and ortho. But for now, I think I'm just going to type a radius of a circle. I'm going to type 10. So that hexagon happens to be inscribed in a circle whose radius is 10. Now let's do the same hexagon, 6 sides at 15, 15, in circumscribed around a circle. And just to kind of snap it in the right place, I just have to highlight the edge of this particular hexagon, and a center point snaps nicely over there. And I could now type 10 again, and you can see there's a pretty big difference between those two hexagons. The first one being inscribed in a circle, and the second one being circumscribed in a circle. And if you did ever want to see the circle, you could just draw it in if you want. I'm just going to click the circle command right there and draw. You could see if I snap to this vertex, it would be the outer one circumscribed, but that wasn't the case. It's the inner one that was circumscribed. I'm sorry, the outer one that was circumscribed and the inner one that is inscribed. If I click that, you'll see these vertices are touching the circle. That's inscribed. And on the other hand, the midpoints of the edges are tangent to the circle when it's circumscribed in this particular case. So you can see how that works. You could also draw a hexagon or any type of polygon. Let me do something else. I'll do an octagon this time. And you can draw it based on its center point as normal, just like that. Or, if you wanted to, you can draw it based on the length of its edge without needing to know anything else. So if I click edge instead of the center point, it asks me for the first endpoint of the edge, which I could just snap onto something if I want to. Let's say if I snapped onto here, and then I could snap onto here, and then I have drawn an octagon with respect to the length of its edge. And that edge is still there, like any other. It doesn't really have to be attached to the thing you used to measure. So that's an interesting way to draw polygons. You can go very, very, very high with a number of polygon sides if you want, all the way down to 3 for a triangle. Now, all this time we've been working with the grid in the background. The grid sort of does behave a little bit erratically. As I zoom in and out, you can see if I still zoom out and I keep going further and further, it seems like the grid keeps resetting itself. That's a feature I don't really like in AutoCAD. It's called adaptive grid, and I like to turn it off. So if you look at the bottom of the screen over here, there's a grid icon, there's a dot icon called snap mode, and there's a drop down that brings you up to the snap settings. So if I turn the snap settings on, I want you to take notice of the fact that on the top left, we have the snap spacing, which is currently set to 0.5, and over here we have grid spacing, which is also currently set to 0.5. So if the grid spacing is set to 0.5, why is it changing? It's because of this. It's checked to be adaptive to the screen zoom. So if you turn that off and hit OK, then the grid still is there, and I can zoom in and I could zoom out as much as I like, but once I zoom out too far, the grid disappears. And I think that's worth it because you can use the grid to measure things on the fly if that's the case. So the grid is easily modified using that particular dropdown. And again, the adaptive grid is a little bit deceiving every once in a while. You could also change the grid a little bit if you want. I like to keep my grid spacing at double the spacing of the snapping. So if I keep it at 1, that's my preferred grid spacing. And if I wanted to turn the grid on and off, I could just click this button down here or press F7. So that's easy. Now here's the interesting part with the grid. You can use it to snap with, as you probably have figured out by now. If I turn that snap on, my cursor still behaves very smoothly when no objects are selected and no commands are selected. But once I select a command and I have that grid snap on, then you can see that the cursor is only bouncing exactly on the locked spaces. And remember, I have my grid snap set to half. So it's bouncing at the midway or halfway points in between each grid point. And with that, very powerfully, I can go ahead and draw lines that fit on the grid, or I can move things as well with respect to the grid. So after I draw this irregular object right here, I'll hit escape, and then I could select all of it if I wanted to and hit move. And then when hitting move, I could simply click off the object or click on the object and move it with respect to those grid spaces. So it's pretty convenient to have the grid spacing set to what you want it to be, and certainly a matter of practice if you want to move it and change it as much as you like during the drawing. So that's about it. We covered rectangles and the several options that come with rectangles. We covered polygons. Most important thing, again, is inscribed and circumscribed, and then we talked about grid and grid snap. Thank you.